Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Live. I'm Myrna Lim, your host. Tonight we will be talking to Brian Brown, one of the renowned local economists in San Francisco, as we embark a journey into year 2010. In a few days, there's a lot of questions, economic questions, that face people like us day to day. We have the biggest unemployment this country has ever imagined. We have changes in the White House. We have Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke again featured as the Man of the Year in Time magazine. We have, in the local level, a $522 million deficit in San Francisco. We have, in a state level, a huge deficit, about $21 billion. All of these economic issues are confronting us and translate into our day to day lives. So, tonight with Brian, we will go back to the bread and butter issues as to, is Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke doing a good job? Does he deserve to be Time of the Year, Man of the Year? Welcome, Brian. How are you?
Good, thank you, Myrna. Thanks very much for your great introduction. Um, is he? Man of the Year is an interesting concept. I mean,
Right.
he certainly is the most powerful man in the world. He controls the reserve currency of the world, the U.S. dollar. Um, I'm not critiquing his, but I don't wish to critique his job performance.
Right.
And sufficient to say that being man of the year is, I think, goes with the importance of his job, not with the outcomes of his leadership.
Well, I saw the television interview of Ron Paul
Yes.
in MSNBC, and basically, Ron Paul is not a big fan of the Federal Reserve Board, right? And he likes to sort of blame the Federal Reserve as having created the recession that we're in. Well, a lot of people say depression, but okay, let's go with their terminology. And being that Chairman Bernanke was from the old regime, so to speak, from the old administration, that he was part of the problem. So suddenly he's, Man of the Year from Time magazine. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly the Federal Reserve under Greenspan and under Bernanke helped create the current depression. The depressions are created not by you and I working and trading and exchanging, but something
Right.
external over which we don't have any control.
Right.
And certainly, what is the 800-pound gorilla that's sitting in the corner of the economy? It's the Federal Reserve System, a privately owned banking system
Right.
created in 1913.
Right.
And they control our money supply. And he was there when the recession occurred. Chairman Greenspan was there for a long time before, and I think that there has to be a lot of questions asked as to the efficacy of their management.
Well, some people say, like Ron Paul was saying, that Bernanke could create trillions of dollars without having to be answerable to the president or to Congress or anybody else.
That's accurate. That's a very accurate statement that Ron Paul makes. And Ron Paul is one of these people that believe that this private banking corporation, the Federal Reserve System, although the president can appoint the chairman, subject to Congress, but that many of their functions should be taken over by the Department of Treasury and printing up our own money and controlling our money supply differently.
Right.
And Ron Paul lays the blame of this recession directly on the Federal Reserve System.
Right. Right.
And I tend to agree with him. I mean, something had to disturb the equilibrium that we had, some form of equilibrium. And was it the permissiveness of the way the markets were regulated? No one quite knows, but the Federal Reserve must take a lot of blame for that. And honestly am surprised that there isn't more of a debate in Congress as to his reappointment and looking into
Well,
this.
let's go back just for the purpose of the audience, just to educate the audience. Is the Federal Reserve part of the government, or is it a separate and independent entity? I think that's the big question in people's
Has some
minds.
ties to the government, like
Right.
the chairman is appointed, but it is a private banking corporation made up of private banks, and they
Okay.
control our money supply. They issue our dollars, and we actually pay them to do it. And
Private
so,
banks meaning
private Federal Reserve banking system was created in 1913, and it's composed of private banks, has different districts, regional banks, and which are interlocking throughout the country. And in a sense, it is it has a close relationship with the Treasury and with the government,
right,
but it is separate.
right.
And many people at the time of the creation of this system opposed it. Many economists opposed it. Other economists have supported it. But, there are two ways that the government may influence the economy in a sort of terms of growth and jobs and things like that. And one is fiscal and the other is monetary policy. And fiscal is broken down into spending money and also in cutting taxes, basically. It's got those two tools. Where the Federal Reserve has the tools of being able to expand the money supply.
Uh-huh.
And the money supply is somewhat of I hate to say this, but a Ponzi game. In other words, the amount of money is a function of how much money is borrowed, because money is lent out based upon the reserves that the bank has. So
Right,
if you go to the bank and deposit $1 million, then I come along and borrow $800,000. They keep maybe $200,000 in reserves. Then I deposit it, and then someone else comes along. So that expands. You see how the credit expands?
Right.
And the Federal Reserve has a lot of ways of influencing this by open market operations, either buying or selling of financial instruments. It's complex, and yet it isn't
Yeah.
complex.
Well, okay, what happened to the TARP funds, the TARP money, that almost 800 billion that have been given to bail out the banking
Banks
system,
and other
and
sectors.
that was supposed to stimulate the economy, but then we see all of the small businesses going bankrupt, and you look at everywhere, you've got a lot of vacant spaces. So the banks are not lending to small businesses. I mean, that's why we have this problem of when they're talking about, well, the economy is recovering, but it's a recovery without jobs. To me, that's a misnomer. How could you have an economic recovery when you don't have employment? I mean, if you look at what employment does, we're a consumer society before this great
Consumer is
recession.
king, is what they're saying.
Exactly.
Yes.
People buy, and the fact that people have money and they have money in their pockets, in their hands, they buy.
Yes.
And then they buy from retail, and the retail industries, the retail shops hire people, and that with the retail, then the manufacturers benefit because they have to manufacture toys, they have to manufacture clothes, they have to manufacture household products,
And they hire people.
and they hire people, and then with the manufacturing you have distribution. So what's missing
Well-
from the standpoint of the government? What is missing? That there's a question as to how much jobs has really been created by the Obama administration with this 782 billion. They can't come up with any number, any amount as to the jobs they created.
Well, you've asked a lot of questions embedded in your statement, and I appreciate your
Exactly.
concerns. And that's the multiplier effect you're talking about,
Right.
where I get paid, and then I go and pay the baker, and the baker pays the flour miller, and so forth.
Right.
Then you also mentioned the banking system. So we know that up until this recession occurred, there was a very permissive policy for allowing credit, right? Just
Right.
about anyone could get credit. And then, and we talked about it in one of our earlier talks as to why the bubble burst. And when the bubble burst, a lot of people